Her world fell apart. When she married a black man, the entire police force, her family, and even her closest friends mocked her. But when she faced the fight of her life, only he stood by her side, and what he revealed at the end left everyone speechless. Detective Claire Monroe had always been a star in the department. Raised in a family of law enforcement veterans, her name carried weight. Her father, a retired police chief, was a man whose reputation for fairness and integrity had shaped her own ideals. But when Claire fell in love with Sergeant Marcus Reed, a principled black officer, the very foundation of her world began to crack. The whispers started almost immediately. At first, they were soft murmurs behind closed doors, casual conversations that Claire could almost ignore. But as their relationship grew, the whispers grew louder. "You could have done better," her colleagues would say. "That's not how we do things." And as the whispers became a chorus, the looks followed. Cold, judgmental stares, the kind that seemed to say more than words ever could. The day Claire and Marcus got married, her father didn't show up. She'd called him, of course, hoping for support. But when the time came, he was nowhere to be found. Her brother, now a ranking officer in the precinct, hadn't even returned her calls for weeks. At the wedding, Claire noticed that most of the officers who had once congratulated her were conspicuously absent. Only a few people showed up to celebrate. Marcus, ever the quiet and stoic man, took it all in stride. He wasn't bothered by the looks, the whispers, or the silence. But Claire was. At first, she kept telling herself that their love was strong enough to endure anything, that the police force, a family she had dedicated her life to, would eventually see past the color of Marcus's skin. But the stares, the cold shoulders, the subtle exclusions, it all began to wear on her. She felt the distance grow, a growing gulf between her and the colleagues who had once considered her a peer, a friend. In briefings, she found herself ignored. During case debriefs, she wasn't called upon. Her once prominent role in department discussions was slowly chipped away. Where there had once been camaraderie, there was only silence. And no one, not even the officers she had trained with, offered any support. Then came the lunch breaks. What used to be a time for shared meals and stories became an awkward silence. She started to sit alone in the corner of the break room, picking at her food as the others ate together, laughing, just out of reach. There were times when she'd look up, searching for a friendly face, only to find them all looking away. The comments weren't always spoken aloud. There were the pointed glances exchanged when she and Marcus walked into the precinct together. The subtle shift in atmosphere when they entered rooms. It wasn't overt hatred, but it was something colder, more insidious. "Did you hear they're giving him a promotion?" whispered one officer, referring to Marcus. "Wonder who pulled the strings for that one." "I don't know how she does it," another one remarked. "I would never be able to marry someone like him." Claire could feel her world narrowing, and yet, she refused to turn her back on Marcus. He was everything she'd ever wanted in a partner. Strong, steady, committed to his work and to her. But as the tension mounted, she couldn't help but wonder whether their love would be enough to survive the weight of everything the department had laid on them. As the weeks passed, Claire's father's silence stung more than any whispered insult. She had hoped that, despite everything, he would come to see how strong their bond was. But the distance between them only grew. Every conversation with him was now a painful reminder that the man who had shaped her views on right and wrong, on justice, was no longer the ally she had once known. By the time the honeymoon phase of their marriage had faded, Claire was already starting to feel the loneliness settle in. The department that had once been her second family was now nothing more than a reminder of everything she had sacrificed for love, and the price she would continue to pay. The tension that Claire had once been able to push aside slowly began to eat at her. What was once a force of camaraderie and shared mission had become a world of silent isolation. No longer invited to lunches or briefings, Claire began to feel the weight of her alienation more acutely. The department she had given her heart and soul to had turned its back on her, and there was no way to fix it. She could no longer pretend that everything was fine. Her colleagues now treated her with indifference. She'd once been the detective everyone trusted, the one they called when they needed something done right. But now, as her career stagnated, promotions passed her by. When she tried to push harder, make her voice heard in case meetings or investigations, she was met with silence. It wasn't just the officers who had once called her their friend. Even the detectives she'd mentored kept their distance. The strain began to show in her work. She would arrive at crime scenes late, distracted, unable to focus. Reports that once took her a few minutes to write now stretched for hours. Evidence went missing, small items at first, the kind of things that could easily be explained away. But the mistakes began to mount. One day, Claire arrived at a scene to find that she couldn't remember where she'd parked her squad car. It should have been a simple thing, a basic instinct she never had to think about. But she stood frozen for a long minute, eyes scanning the street for any sign of her car. "Are you all right, detective?" a rookie asked her, noticing the confusion. Claire forced a smile and nodded, but it was hard to shake the feeling that she was losing herself, that the woman she had been, the strong, determined detective, was slipping through her fingers. It wasn't until her body started to give out that the truth became undeniable. During a morning briefing, as she stood to discuss a new lead in a case, the room suddenly spun. Her legs buckled, and she collapsed in front of her colleagues. The world around her became a blur of flashing lights, the urgent voices of medics. Claire barely heard the words as they told her that they needed to take her to the hospital. Marcus was there, as always, his face etched with concern. He held her hand tightly as they rushed to the emergency room. The diagnosis came within hours: early-onset dementia. The words hit Claire like a punch in the gut. It wasn't just that she had been forced to confront the fractures in her marriage and career. Now, she had to face the fact that she was losing herself. The disease was progressive and irreversible. There would be no miracle cure, no hope for a recovery. The department offered her sympathy, half-hearted and insincere. They put her on administrative leave, but in the back of her mind, she knew it was just a matter of time before they would forget about her completely. But Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't offer empty words or easy reassurances. He simply stayed. He had always been the quiet strength beside her, the one person who never doubted her, never judged her. He told her that they would fight this together, just like they had fought everything else. It was a bittersweet comfort. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, Claire found herself sinking deeper into the fog of her condition. The world outside her home seemed to fade away. There were no visitors from the department, no calls from old friends, only the steady, unyielding presence of Marcus. He became everything to her: her caretaker, her protector, her voice when she could no longer speak for herself. And despite the growing isolation, despite the feeling that the world had abandoned her, Claire held on to one constant truth: Marcus had never left her side. The days blurred into each other. Claire's world had shrunk to the four walls of their home, the walls that had once witnessed her strength now closing in on her as the disease began to take more and more. Each morning, Marcus would help her out of bed, steadying her as she stumbled to the kitchen, her movements slow and uncertain. His hands were always gentle, always firm, the way they had been during their many years of partnership on the force. But now his role had shifted. He was no longer her partner on cases or in the line of duty. He was her caretaker, her protector. Marcus had retired early, opting to take on the responsibility of caring for her full-time. He did it without a second thought. There was no hesitation in his eyes when he made the decision. He'd been the steady rock in her life through every storm, and now he would continue to stand by her, even as she began to lose herself. As Claire's condition worsened, she found it increasingly difficult to grasp the details of the world around her. Conversations slipped through her fingers like sand. She would try to focus on the faces of the people who came to visit, but their expressions were unfamiliar, their voices distant. The sense of isolation was suffocating. The department that had once celebrated her, the very same department that had turned its back on her because of her marriage to Marcus, was now nothing more than a shadow in the background of her life. Marcus kept the connection alive, speaking to her about the cases she had worked on, reminding her of the accomplishments she had achieved. He kept her mind sharp, talking through the files she had once been so meticulous about, reading them aloud when she could no longer make sense of the pages. But no one else from the force called. No one came to check on her. The friends she had trusted to be there for her in the dark moments had all faded away, their silence deafening. Even her family, the ones who had never fully accepted Marcus, stayed away. The phone calls from her siblings had become less frequent, and when they did come, they were filled with hollow pleasantries and empty promises. The cracks that had formed in their relationships when Claire had married Marcus had deepened over time. And now, with her condition worsening, they were nowhere to be found. Claire's father, a retired police chief whose opinion had always carried weight in the department, had stopped speaking to her entirely. He couldn't bring himself to accept her marriage, and with her health declining, he couldn't face her. His pride, his love for his daughter, was overshadowed by the shame he felt about her choices. It was too much for him to reconcile, and so he retreated into silence. Yet through it all, Marcus remained unwavering. He helped Claire bathe, dress, feed herself. He brushed her hair with the same care he had shown when they were young, fresh officers on the beat, side by side. The tenderness in his actions wasn't a duty. It was love, a quiet, fierce love that never wavered, even when the world around them had. One afternoon, as Claire sat in her favorite chair, staring out the window at the city they had both served, she felt a tear slip down her cheek. She didn't know why she was crying, but the weight of it all, the isolation, the loneliness, the memories slipping away, was too much to bear. Marcus was at her side in an instant. He knelt beside her, taking her hand in his. "Hey," he whispered, his voice soft. "I'm right here, Claire. Always." She couldn't find the words, but she squeezed his hand, the one thing she still had the strength to hold on to. It wasn't enough to stop the ache in her chest, but it was something, and that something was all she needed. Marcus never flinched. Even as the world outside them continued to crumble, even as the silence from the department grew louder, Marcus stayed. He had always been her anchor, and now, in this storm of her fading memories, he remained her anchor, steady and unyielding. Claire passed away quietly one cool autumn evening, her breath soft and labored as she slipped away from the world she had once fought so hard to shape. Marcus was there, as he had always been, holding her hand, sitting at her side, speaking her name, even as the light in her eyes faded. The room, once filled with the sounds of her strength, was now filled with the silence of her absence. But even in that silence, Marcus felt her presence. She had fought until the end, and so, in a way, her fight was still ongoing. The department did nothing. No call came in from any of her colleagues, none of the officers she had worked with. No flag was lowered to half-mast. No word of condolence. Not even the faintest whisper from the precinct. For all their words, their promises of loyalty and brotherhood, they had vanished when the world was no longer watching. Claire had paid the price for choosing Marcus. The department had taken her, and now they had discarded her memory as easily as they had discarded her while she was alive. But Marcus would not let them forget her. He couldn't. The world needed to know who Claire Monroe was, not just as a detective, but as a woman, a partner, and a fighter. The city, her city, needed to remember. It was a rookie officer only a few months on the force who started it. Marcus had never worked with her directly, but he had known her as a fresh-faced recruit with idealism in her eyes, the same idealism that had once burned brightly in Claire. This young officer, tired of the hollow silence that followed Claire's death, took to social media, posting a tribute to her. It was simple but profound. Detective Claire Monroe was more than a cop. She was the example we should all strive to be. She was our champion, our protector, and she always stood for justice, no matter the cost. The post went viral almost immediately. Soon, it spread across the city's social media networks. Old suspects, many of whom had once been on the wrong side of the law, spoke out. They praised Claire's fairness, her unshakable integrity, and her dedication to justice. They shared stories of her kindness and professionalism, the moments when she had given them the benefit of the doubt, when she had listened to them as people, not just criminals. The civilian community that had been following the story began to rally. A small but loud chorus of voices demanded answers. Why had Claire never been honored for her service? Why had the department turned its back on one of their own? Why had she been erased from the narrative? An investigative reporter picked up the story, digging into the department's treatment of interracial couples, especially those who had been in prominent positions like Claire. The truth was coming to light, slowly, but surely. The city had begun to listen. The uncomfortable truth that had been swept under the rug for so many years was now in the open for everyone to see. Marcus watched it all unfold from his quiet home. It was bittersweet, the recognition Claire was receiving in death, the recognition that should have been hers in life. He had spent years loving her in silence, supporting her as the world crumbled around them, and now the world was starting to see what he had always known. Claire Monroe was one of the best, but the hardest part was yet to come. Marcus had never expected an apology, but he received one nonetheless. Claire's father, the man who had once viewed Marcus as nothing more than a threat to his family's legacy, came to his home one evening. His face was haggard, his eyes filled with sorrow. When he spoke, his voice cracked with emotion. "I was wrong," he said, the words barely a whisper. "I was wrong to turn my back on you both." Marcus stood, speechless, as the weight of those words hung heavy in the air. He had never expected his father-in-law to admit his mistake, not after everything that had happened. But here he was, broken by the reality of what his silence had cost. It wasn't just Claire's memory. It was his own guilt. That night, Claire's brother, now a high-ranking officer in the department, held a press conference. The public apology was formal, but it carried the weight of years of unspoken regret. The city watched as the truth came out, as the world slowly began to reckon with its past mistakes. It was painful, it was messy, but it was happening. The mayor called for a memorial ceremony in Claire's honor. It would be a small, intimate affair, but the gesture was a step forward, a sign that things were changing. Claire would be posthumously awarded the city's highest service medal, a recognition she had more than earned, but one she would never get to hold herself. Marcus stood at the front of the ceremony, his eyes steady but filled with an indescribable pain. As they handed him Claire's medal, he held it in both hands, feeling its weight. He didn't need the department's respect. He didn't need their validation. Claire's legacy, their shared legacy, was far more important than any award or recognition. And now, the city was finally waking up to the truth. The ceremony was brief, but its impact was undeniable. As the applause faded, Marcus remained standing, holding Claire's medal in his hand. He wore it around his neck, the chain a stark reminder of her sacrifice. His fingers brushed the edges of the medal, the sharp contours a small echo of the life they had built together. A life filled with more pain and struggle than either of them had ever deserved. But it was also filled with love, with dedication, and with an unwavering commitment to justice. He glanced around the room. The officers who had once frozen her out, who had let her fade into nothingness, were all there now. But Marcus didn't feel anger. He didn't feel rage. He felt empty. Empty because none of this would bring Claire back. None of the tributes, the apologies, the memorials could fill the void she had left. He had lost her years ago, not in death, but in the cold indifference of the very people she had given her life to protect. He cleared his throat as the mayor called on him to speak. The room fell silent, the cameras flashing, eager to capture the moment. Marcus stepped to the podium, holding the medal in front of him. His voice, when it came, was steady. "She never stopped serving," Marcus said, his words simple but profound. The silence around her didn't change that. She served with integrity. She served with a heart that never wavered. The only thing that changed was that we stopped listening. He paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the crowd. But maybe now, someone will listen when it happens again. The room remained still. There was no applause, no standing ovation. Just the quiet acknowledgement that the truth had been spoken, and perhaps, for the first time, the The city was starting to see the full picture of Claire's life and her sacrifice. As the ceremony ended, Marcus walked slowly to the back of the room. The metal around his neck felt heavier now, as if it carried the weight of Claire's entire legacy. He stepped out into the cool night air, letting the quiet of the city wash over him. It wasn't the closure he had hoped for. It wasn't the recognition Claire deserved. But it was something. And for now, that would have to be enough. He made his way to the park bench, the one where he and Claire had spent so many nights, talking about cases, about life, about the future. It had been their place of peace, away from the chaos of the precinct, away from the judgment of others. The bench was empty now, but the memories lingered, like ghosts of the past. Marcus sat down slowly, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes gazing out over the city. The streets were quieter now, the noise of the world fading into the background. It was the same city Claire had worked to protect, the same city that had turned its back on her. But tonight it felt different. There was a sense of change in the air, a shift in the winds. As he sat there, a young black woman approached, her uniform crisp and new, her face filled with the same hope and determination that Claire had once had. She stopped in front of him, her eyes wary, as if unsure how to approach the man who had loved Claire so deeply. "Detective Monroe?" she asked, her voice soft but full of respect. Marcus smiled, a small, sad smile, as he looked up at her. "She's why I'm still here." The young woman nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She sat beside him, not speaking, just sharing the silence. A silence that was filled with the echoes of everything Claire had stood for, everything she had sacrificed. And as Marcus sat there, his heart heavy with loss yet strangely full of purpose, he knew that Claire's legacy would live on, not just in the memory of those who had known her, but in the hearts of those who would follow in her footsteps. The fight for justice was never truly over. It was carried on by those who refused to forget, by those who remembered the ones who had been lost. Justice wasn't always swift. Sometimes it came after the silence, when those left behind refused to forget. And as Marcus looked out over the city, he knew that Claire's spirit would always be there, in every case fought, in every injustice uncovered, in every life saved. In the long watch, the silence became its own form of justice. And Marcus was content to keep watching, to keep waiting, until the world was ready to listen again.